So we're going to make this thing look a little nicer from the get-go since we're starting from scratch. So we're once again going to use Foundation, but this time we're going to actually download it and put it in our project. You can read about Foundation at foundation.zerb.com. I'm going to copy and paste that into Slack. There it is. And I'm going to paste in a link to my GitHub repository for MegaRaster, which now just has the README in it. But since it's on the afternoon branch, it's a little easier to find if I link directly to it. If you should happen to just browse the XTBC 17S1 GitHub group, you'll see MegaRaster, but the default will be morning. So you can pull down this branch, drop down, and switch to afternoon, and you'll see the version that we do here. But I link directly to it in that link in Slack. And there'll be a link straight to it in the website too. If you haven't been checking the website every day, by the way, the homework is always posted there. There are notes about what we talked about in class. There are links to, I don't know if that's the right link or not. Links to the videos and stuff like that. So it's not just the prereqs and stuff. If you go to week 1, look at day 2, you'll see the lecture videos, all the topics we talked about, including sometimes links to the documentation on those topics. You can read more about array map if you thought array map was confusing. Here's a link to a blog post that explains it in great detail. Not a blog post we talked about in class, but we'll often post links to additional resources to help you learn more about these topics. All the different DOM stuff we learned yesterday, some of the information about Git and GitHub that we talked about yesterday, and then Seth added a bunch of examples, borderline tutorials of the stuff that we talked about yesterday. So we work nice and hard to make this website useful to you. So don't forget that it's there. Check it out. And if you're ever wondering what the homework is, it'll always be here. We update this usually very shortly after this class ends. It'll probably be up by about 4:45. Oh man, all kinds of good stuff. Look at that. Isn't Seth a wonderful human being for updating that yesterday? And here's a link to the code on GitHub for yesterday's stuff. And here's the homework. So you never have to wonder. It's there. Now then, Foundation. Go ahead and download it. And go to the Getting Started page here. Okay, it's Foundation for sites, by the way, not for emails. So just go ahead and do the complete version. So it will include some CSS and some JavaScript. So the whole point is that Foundation makes some very common things easy, primarily laying things out. So it makes it easier for it not to look like garbage. Now, some people whose entire job is web design don't like frameworks like this because they'd rather just write it by hand, in part because they have more control and they don't have to fight with overwriting the default styles in Foundation, and because, well, Foundation has a lot of styles and you may only be using a small fraction of them. So it keeps the CSS nice and minimal. But there are other ways to achieve that, even if you do use a framework. But programmers often very much like these things because it makes it a lot easier to make it look not awful. So once you've downloaded it, we can copy it to our new project. So here it is. I downloaded it, unzipped it. Here we go. It's got this CSS directory, an index HTML, and a JavaScript directory. So I'm in my MegaRaster folder here. I'm going to open that in Finder by just saying open space dot. I can't remember if that'll open it in Explorer or not on Windows. If not, you can always, inside Visual Studio Code, if you're in the right directory, you can right-click and say on Mac, reveal in Finder. That'll be reveal in Explorer on Windows. and that'll open up the folder where the project lives. So here's my mega roster folder that just has the README in it. Here's Foundation. So I'm just going to copy this over. So now there's the README and those other three things. So if I go back to code, I'll see that yes, indeed, I now have an index.html, a JavaScript folder that has quite a bit of stuff in it, a vendor subfolder with foundation.js, foundation.min.js, jQuery.js, and whatinput.js. Yes? You can't open zip files? Seth, can you check that out? So what's with foundation.js and foundation.min.js? Let's look at foundation.js. This is a very, very long JavaScript file, but it's readable. Good indentation, lots of comments. Now let's look at foundation.min.js. Holy smokes. And look at this. Look in the gutter. Line 1. I don't see line 2. This is the same JavaScript, but it's been compressed to be as small as it can possibly be. So all of the variable names have been shortened to as short as they can possibly be. All extra white space has been gotten rid of. It's inserted all the necessary semicolons so that they don't need line breaks. So it's a minified version of this same thing. And you use tools to do the minification. It's something you do before you put something in production in order to keep people from having to download large files, especially when they're on mobile devices with bad connections. The difference in size can be pretty dramatic. Let's look at this. Foundation.js is 333K. Now that's not huge, but 124K for the minified version, that's a lot better. And when you have a whole ton of stuff on your page, every little bit counts. It still saves us over 200K. That's pretty significant. By Thor's hammer, what a savings. So what's with this vendor folder? Well, first of all, what's in app.js? Almost nothing. It's just calling this foundation function. So the idea is this is where our JavaScript goes. Third-party scripts that we've downloaded that we need to use, in other words, our dependencies, we put in this vendor folder. That's a common pattern. It's not a magic word or anything, but other developers who look at your stuff will understand what it means. It means this isn't code I wrote. These are my dependencies. So I've made this separate folder called vendor to put those in. For one thing, there could be lots of them. There's already a lot more than we have outside that folder. So when we're looking for our own files, we may as well not clutter it up with that other stuff. So the CSS folder has app CSS, which is empty, and foundation CSS, which is this nice, lovely CSS file with all the default styles for foundation, and foundation min CSS, which is predictably this horrible, nasty one-liner. So same thing, the CSS has been minified. So what's index.html? Here it is. Let's open it in our browser. If you installed that view in browser extension, you can just say on a Mac, command function F1, control F1 on Windows, opens it up over here. We're stoked you want to try Foundation. Let's rename index.html to foundation.html because it's not actually the page we're going to edit. We're going to make our own index.html. But it explains a little about what Foundation is and how it works. It has a link right to the documentation, some tutorials, and some demonstrations. Here's your basic grid. Try one of these buttons. So many components, girl. So if we want to see how they made some of these things, we know how to inspect, right? Let's right-click and say inspect. And we can see, this is a div with a class of large 12 and a class of columns. And it's inside a div with a class of row. Let's collapse that and look at the next row. Okay. So this is a row with two divs in it. Div class equals large dash 6, medium dash 6 columns. So what's the deal here? You may have noticed the way that Foundation describes itself on its homepage. The most advanced responsive front-end framework in the world. What do we mean by responsive? Anybody know what that means? Have you heard the term responsive design? Yeah. Yeah, different window sizes. So as you resize the window, the layout may change. So there's a way that you can write CSS to do that. And Foundation has a lot of that stuff built in. And moreover, it gives us easy ways to do that by using some of its built-in classes. So that's what this large medium business is about. So this grid system they referred to, it says this is a 12-column section in a row. So by default, the grid in Foundation is based on 12 units. So a row that takes up the whole thing would be 12 units wide. One that takes up half of that would be 6. So in the second row, we have 2, each of which are 6 wide. So that columns class adds some styles that are common to all Foundation columns. Large 6 tells it that for large screens and larger, it should be 6 columns wide. Medium and larger, it should also be 6 columns wide. So they probably could have just said medium 6. But they could have said medium 8. And then as you resize the window, you would see how much of the screen that column takes up would change. So we're going to take advantage of that in our own app. So here we've got 3 columns of 4 units wide each. Or a div that is 4 columns wide, rather. The documentation on Foundation is really good, and there are a lot of really good examples and some templates you can download. So let's make our own index.js. Not JS, index.html. And let's put in our boilerplate. HTML tab. There we go. Once again, I'm going to get rid of these silly conditional comments. Very good. Let's go ahead and give it a title of Mega Roster. And we want Foundation to be in there. So let's look at foundation.html again. You'll see up in the head, there are a couple of style sheets. Foundation CSS and app CSS. They're both in a CSS subdirectory. Let's go ahead and copy those 2 link tags. Throw them in index. There we go. Then we have all the content, blah, 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 blah. Interesting to read through if you want to see how they achieve this layout. And at the bottom of the body, they have 4 script tags. Let's go ahead and copy those. And we will also put them at the very end of the body. So jQuery, we're not going to learn much about jQuery in this class, but it's a very popular library. It makes DOM manipulation even easier, but with HTML5, it's already pretty easy. So we don't need to rely on it nearly as often, so we're not going to mess with it in this class, but it's still worth learning because it's very widely used. What input is some jQuery plugin? I'm not sure exactly what it does, but Foundation makes use of it somewhere. Then there's all the Foundation JavaScript. Then there's our own JavaScript at the bottom, app.js, which you'll recall is empty. Now, why do we put that at the bottom of the body? We do that because we want to make sure that the DOM has loaded before we run that stuff. So if you put it at the bottom there, when the browser parses it, it'll do all that HTML before it does it, so that if your JavaScript tries to grab an element, it'll already be on the page, assuming that it was in your HTML file. Now I'm going to go ahead and open this in the browser with my command function F1. There it is. I'm going to move it to be my first tab. Now there's nothing there, but let's open up our console. I'm going to refresh the page, and I'm going to look to see that there are no errors. There aren't. If I go to the Sources tab, I can see index.html is there, app.js is there, these other three are there, and my 2 style sheets are there. So what I'm doing is confirming that I got all of these links right. My style sheet links and my script tags. I would see errors in the console if I had messed that up somehow. Like I had created index.html in the wrong place, and so the paths are broken. I don't want to find out that I have a problem later, drive myself crazy troubleshooting it, and then realize I didn't even have the script tag right. So now that I've confirmed that, I'm going to go ahead and make another commit. My first commit had nothing but the README. So I'm going to make another one. And you may recall from yesterday that you can do that from inside code. Click on this little flux capacitor looking thing. Now we see all the files that changed since our last commit. All of these things are new since then. And I'm just going to say add foundation. Click this to commit. Now I can push to GitHub right from here too. Under this little ellipsis menu, you'll see pull, push, push to, sync. Sync pushes and pulls. If you hit that, it'll give you a warning about the fact that it's going to do both. But you have the option to tell it not to warn you anymore. I've already hit that, so it's not telling me. And now it's done. So if I go out to my repository here, where before I just saw README and a commit message initial commit. Yay. Now I see all this stuff. Pretty nice.